Wake up, babe. It's been 13 years. New Alan Wake is finally here, cultivating all the lessons learned from their previous games. Remedy has finally returned to the Wake IP, pushing storytelling through media to its very limits. Today, we'll be looking at what a game developed with both the core heart of creative storytelling and the unique functions granted by the gaming medium can bring. A game within a movie, or a movie within a game. Get your coffees ready and watch out for the wild deer as we take our second opinion for Alan Wake 2. Alan Wake 2, by developer Remedy Entertainment, known for their previous IPs such as Max Payne and Control, is the third-person survival horror sequel to the original Alan Wake, set 13 years after the end of Alan Wake. Oh, yeah, that's clever, Remedy. Wake 2 features a dual protagonist storyline, both with their own unique mechanisms and gameplay. The story begins with newcomer FBI investigator Saga Anderson investigating a string of murders within Bright Falls, the fictional Pacific Northwest town of the first Alan Wake. You later take control of Alan Wake himself, searching for an escape from the corrupted reflection of New York, known as the Dark Place. Both characters share the central gameplay mechanisms of a third-person shooter, carried over from the first Alan Wake. Most of your enemies are protected by a dark presence, which can be burned off by a burst of light from your flashlight, which is limited by both your battery life and your reserve batteries. Shoot them in their big blowy critical point, or go for the old faithful headshots, dodge attacks with your dodge button, rinse and repeat. You'll also find utility items to give you an edge when you start feeling overwhelmed, such as flares to burn darkness in a larger area, throwable propane tanks as explosives, and even flashbang grenades. Why are there flashbang grenades in a quaint little camping town? Who knows? Part of the mystery, perhaps. The difference between the two really starts to show when you look beyond the basics of combat. Saga resides in the corporal world, and as such, her enemies are also corporal. Though the corruption has given them strange abilities, such as super speed dashes over long distance and effective teleportation, your weaponry will affect them with or without the power of light to assist you. Saga's loadout does feel like the weaker of the two, at least for the first half of the game, requiring more shots to take down a single foe, and thus causing more resources spent through munitions and utility. Her gameplay feels more like proper survival horror, with the constant feeling that you'll have to ration your ammo and take careful shots against the enemy known as the Taken. Playing as Saga, your exploration is more open-ended, with freedom to choose where you want to go, barring areas restricted by key items, like, well, keys. The areas of Bright Falls are large open spaces, with many little side paths often hiding extra ammunition, supplies, and low equipable charms available only to Saga that augment her combat and exploration abilities. All of these are either simply found through unlocked containers, hidden away within locked caches, or even mysteriously conjured up by rituals. Unlocked containers are pretty self-explanatory, while the latter two invokes that standard survival horror feel, requiring you to complete a little challenge, do a little puzzle, solve a riddle, or search for clues to how to get them open. Hope you remember your middle school arithmetics. Wake, on the other hand, invokes more towards the gameplay of the first game. He has a more limited arsenal unlocked over the course of his campaign, but each weapon is immensely powerful, taking down enemies with a few well-placed shots. Consequently, the enemies themselves are more diabolical. Not only are they incorporeal when surrounded in darkness, not all of the dark entities you meet are actual enemies. As a matter of fact, the majority of them are not. Instead, their phantoms will circle you menacingly until they simply fizzle out of existence. You'll never know who's looking to get you until the dangerous one actively try to cave your head in. A typical encounter will find you surrounded by these shadowy figures, staring them down, waiting for the aggressive ones to make their first move. His sections are somewhat more linear, taking you to specific locations, clearing the enemies along the way to discover the way forward. And that way forward is also opened in different ways between two characters. Saga, as an FBI investigator, is generally looking to do detective work to find progression, combing through the environment, picking up clues, reading up on letters or emails, and speaking to other characters for information, all cultivating into Saga's mental office as the Mind Palace. Mind Place, Saga specifies. Here, in this pretty cool explorable representation of the typical UI menu, you'll find the usual things like a record of your collectibles and your weapon upgrades, but also character profiling and a case board, important factors towards your investigation. Here, you'll be organizing the clues that you've uncovered, working your way to a deduction that'll lead you to the next step. Wake, on the other hand, is not an investigator, but a writer, with a bit of a magical touch. He's able to adjust the current state of the dark place, often by shifting its moment in time through keywords learned from visions of a fictional, non-fictional character written into the dark place. Yeah, it's a bit complicated. Wake also utilizes a magical lamp that can remove or restore specific sources of light, which also warps the state of those areas of light. Part of his gameplay loop often finds you searching for these pockets of light to store into his lamp, bringing them to restore light elsewhere in order to reveal a path forward. The two playstyles are just diverse enough that when the game offers you the opportunity to switch between the two at specific save rooms, you'll likely want, and is recommended, to take it for that breath of fresh air, along with keeping the story parity. And story is really the core to Alan Wake 2, set as both the sequel to the original Alan Wake and an extension to Remedy's expanded universe. Wake 2 serves as a link between Bright Falls and the world of Remedy's previous release, Control. Saga's investigations over the conspiracy that is Bright Falls finds herself seemingly being written into a predetermined story, while Wake attempts to do the writing himself, penning himself into the plot in an attempt to escape the dark place. The entire story tracks like a self-aware horror story, giving answers and conclusions to certain plot points while deliberately leaving others in the dark for that sense of dark mystery. Keeping to its roots, but avoids the predictability of tropes, with the surprises rolling in through your experience. The theme of bringing forms of art into reality comes into full force within the medium of a game, owing to some incredible auditory and visual set pieces that I don't really want to spoil. Remedy really had fun designing the story campaign, and it shows when things go way off the rails. And their penchant for use of live action scenes has been strongly implemented into Wake 2. Quantum Break, one of Remedy's initial games that used the live action scenes, saw relatively mixed reactions to the idea, while Control utilized live action in a more sparingly but tasteful manner. In Wake 2, however, these live action scenes are everywhere, from being interpolated on top of gameplay scenes to full-on cutscenes featuring real flesh and blood actors. As strong as the in-game facial rigging is, the acting involved in the live action scenes add a lot to the emotional state of each character, with Ilka Vili's acting and Matthew Poretta's voice really displaying Alan Wake's sense of panic, confusion, and slowly dwindling sanity. And who can say no to story writer Sam Lake's constant cameos in both the live action scenes and as a character model? This guy's everywhere. As for the world itself, Wake 2 features two aforementioned locales, with the return of Bright Falls within Saga's campaign, while Wake now explores a new warped world that is not quite New York City within the Dark Place. Both utilizes the themes of light as a strong focal artistic point. The Pacific Northwest area of Bright Falls is heavily wooded, and the way light casts its way through the tree lines is both striking and occasionally haunting, while the dark streets of the Dark Place are scantily lit by fluorescent street lamps and neon lights, with occasional areas of strong white light. It looks great, even without the use of ray tracing. But this isn't a perfect world. We'll get to the subjective gameplay issues within my opinion a little later, but during my gameplay I encountered a bevy of technical engine issues, some of which were frustratingly potential softlocks, the core of which is the occasional slow loading of collision assets and physics tomfoolery. Right into the game, I find a real spooky cup of coffee, which later expands into items like flares, along with enemies that seemingly fall straight through the floor. And you yourself can end up falling through the floor, due to the occasional slow loading of map assets. You might charge through a door and discover that there isn't a room behind it, at least, not yet, and fall straight down the void, and there's no backrooms here to catch you. Other times, thanks to Wake's reality warping abilities, changed aspects of the world end up loading slower than the level itself. A subway train might look like it's vanished in one reality, but wait a few seconds and poof, you're now stuck inside of a train that's popped into existence. Or door might seem to open up after shifting to another reality, when it turns out that you've walked through that space where something's supposed to be blocking it off, and it's now inhibiting your return, trapping you. These were most of the times complete softlocks, requiring a reload of a checkpoint and careful patience for assets to load, as to not repeat the same mistakes. The dialogue would also sometimes fire off at strange times, with characters talking over and across each other, or even in one case, beginning a conversation with a character that was completely absent from the location at that time. And within gameplay, the inventory storage honestly should have had a few extra rows. By 2/3 of the game, Saga, with her more explorative gameplay, had completely filled up her shoebox storage with undiscardable charms and unneeded healing items, which really put a damper on the enjoyment of finding supplies, as I was constantly doing inventory management for every single find. Now some of these, by the time of my playthrough and the time of recording, has apparently been addressed through patches, but returning to check, almost all of these issues still occur, albeit less frequently. By the time of reviewing, perhaps more will be fixed, so your mileage may vary. But even with all these issues in mind, as we move into my opinion, I love this game. It's a weird feeling, as I have a lot of negative opinions for Alan Wake 2. The combat gameplay feels relatively bare bones, simply having you burn up dark shields and shoot vital spots over and over with very little in terms of evolution. There's a handful of enemy types, but at their base, they're handled in the exact same way. The different utility consumables are simply slightly different ways to project an area of light or damage. It's serviceable, but simple. The best moments of combat are during set pieces where you need to fight back against larger swarms of enemies, instead of the few heads that you'll typically find the majority of the time. Here, you'll be constantly relocating, keeping tracks of enemies surrounding you, and using every utility item available to quickly beat back the waves. But these moments were quite far and few between. And speaking of few and far between, some of Saga's sections can feel like legitimate treks through the woods. The woodland parks feel accurate to the Pacific Northwest, but as you explore the areas, opening containers and finding supplies, you might find yourself in situations where you're finding plenty of ammo, but nothing to use them on. I'd have long hikes along a path and find absolutely no enemies, though thankfully, some of the cult stash puzzles did present a constant enjoyable distraction. Saga's key mechanic of our investigative mind palace also looks more interesting than it actually is. Putting together clues to organize details of your case does add to the immersive experience, and can help if you start to get lost in the conspiracy, but there's essentially no gameplay mechanic going on here. You can't really make any mistakes or slot your clues in the wrong area, as the clues simply bounce off the case board if placed incorrectly. If you want it, you could simply just brute force it. The use of the case board also becomes inconsistent at times. There'll be points in the game where you simply cannot progress to a plot point without completing lines through the case board, while other times you could simply ignore it entirely, where the game simply completes the case board for you the next time you open it up, as the case has become irrelevant. Wake's sections are better in this regard. His reality warping mechanics usually end up just being warped to the latest unlocked keyword reality to progress, but there are some sections where you'll be hopping between realities, utilizing your special lamp to open up new paths for you to progress. It was a decent bit more interesting than simply throwing up sticky notes on a board, at least to me. The bugs were also quite annoying, occasionally reversing long periods of progress due to a softlock scenario, especially with the load times that can get quite lengthy. But even with the basic gameplay and the loss of progress, I constantly wanted to keep playing, and that is primarily due to how much of Alan Wake 2's strength is tied to its cinematic experience. The characters are well written and well acted, as they all feel believably quirky in their own way. The dialogue writing and direction is also good, with characters believably cutting each other off or talking over each other in a more realistic manner, rather than stiffly taking turns like in many medias. The story itself is horror, but more in that SCP Foundation style, rather than being a true horror game. Remedy's new, very apparent influence by SCP carries over from Control to here, with a lot of the spookiness carrying absurd or even comedic edges to them. It feels fresh against its genre category. The world is well defined, with great use of thematic light to add that extra bit of drama to set pieces. The use of live action scenes feel unnaturally natural. Usually, games utilizing live actors, from the age of FMVs to the more recent titles, feel just a little campy, whenever deliberately or not. But Wake 2 pulls it off by keeping the scenes well directed, and having legitimately strong actors. Even the deadpan delivery of the brothers' commercials that you occasionally run across feel deliberately well directed. Alan Wake 2 plays more like a cinematic experience, rather than a game to be played. The amazing sights, the cool scenes, the drama and the tension are all felt, but they're not only delivered through canned cutscenes, but also actively during gameplay. Sure, said gameplay feels a little flat, but I was too busy being distracted by the overall experience as a whole to be nitpicking too much on gameplay faults. Alan Wake 2 is an excellent execution of a cinematic narrative experience that stays tied to gameplay, rather than dipping too far into walking simulator territory, or effectively having a movie within a game, like in the Metal Gear Solid series. Unless you're the kind of person who is adamant that games should only be for gameplay, and visual experiences should only be for shows and movies, I can quite easily recommend Alan Wake 2 to everyone. Thanks for watching to the end, and sorry for the horrible release schedule. As a channel that's still in its infancy, it's difficult on the wallet to obtain games to review, and I'm not looking to churn out low-effort clickbait opinion pieces on games that I didn't enjoy. But for those who enjoyed the content, all I can ask is for a like and subscribe to give this channel a little more legitimacy. That legitimacy turns to possible review copies and a possible revenue stream for more games, and it doesn't cost you a dime. Let's try to hit those magic 4 numbers, huh? If you're interested in checking out these games live, we also stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/secondop. That's second up with a number 2, streaming games like this and also indie releases across the age, live most days of the week. Following that channel also helps me out a ton. And most importantly, enjoy more games.